Hello, 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 and welcome back to episode 7 of the Heavy Pen Podcast. I am your host, Chandelarian, and this is the show where I sit alone in a room and talk to you about storytelling, why it's cool, why you should do it, and how to do it responsibly. Welcome back, everybody. I'm feeling super jazzed. I'm very excited right now. And the reason that I'm excited is multifaceted and complex, much like my own talents. But specifically, I'm very excited today because today we are doing the first of something I want to excuse me. The first of something that I want to kind of make a bit of a running theme where we actually talk about specific things. Today we will be doing the genre talk, and we will specifically be talking about dark fantasy, one of my personal favorite genres of all the things. Specifically, I really love dark fantasy illustrations. I think, it's such a cool thing. I really like dark fantasy a lot. I'm struggling to kind of streamline my thoughts just because thinking about this is super just just all the things are hitting me at once. It is one of my favorite genres just because of the sheer amount of imagination that people throw into it. And I don't want to get into that right now just yet because that's that whole concept of the imagination and all that is something that I want to talk about a bit later in this episode. But to kind of compress all of my thoughts, I love dark fantasy because I love seeing the things that people do with it. And I think that's super cool. But yeah, so I believe that's all the introductions needing to be done out of the way. So let's just jump straight into our first point. So let's get into the overview. So, overview of dark fantasy. What exactly is dark fantasy? Well, the most common definition used by the majority of people about dark fantasy is it is fantasy with horror elements. Although there is a bit more to it than just that, but that is also the broad category. And as I start going into this, it is important to note that genre exists to help us understand unfamiliar stories. It's a label. It's oh, you know what it is? It's like a stereotype. The calling back to last week's episode, genres are like stereotypes. They exist to give us context and bits and pieces of information about a thing that we're unfamiliar with before we explore it more fully, but they aren't capable of fully covering all of what they are trying to explain. You don't need me to tell you that every story in a particular genre is different to each other, but, it is important to belabor this point because, yeah, dark fantasy has its own entire vibe, and it's not really just horror plus fantasy, but it also kind of is. I like I've said, I really like dark fantasy. It's awesome. It's one of my favorite things, but it is also kind of the epitome of not for everyone. And I hate saying that because I feel like it's very easy to hear someone say that and get the impression that it's just them going, oh, you wouldn't like it because you're too X, Y, or Z. But no. Not every genre, not every type of story, not every medium of story is for everyone, or at the very least, not for everyone in the same way. And dark fantasy, despite my absolute adoration for it, is one of those things where it's just a lot. And not everyone needs to have that. Going back to the food analogy, some people are allergic to things, or some things just don't agree with people. And they are not lesser for not being able to consume certain types of food. In the same way, no one is a weakling or whatever for not being able to handle, or just not, like, just should not be handling certain themes. Like, you wouldn't look at someone who suffered, like, some significant trauma, who avoids that in the media that they consume. You wouldn't call that person weak or lesser. Or at least I sincerely hope you wouldn't, because that'd be awful. But, like, it's like that kind of thing. Like, not everybody needs to like every type of genre and every type of story, and that's okay. And dark fantasy is kind of the epitome of that, where it's like, there's a lot of good that can come out of dark fantasy for those who have the stomach to go through it, but not everybody does, and it's not a bad thing. Like, you're not lesser for consuming it, and you're not lesser for not consuming it, is kind of just what I want to say there. So yeah, that's the overview. I think we can move out of the overview, and let's just look at some examples of dark fantasy to see exactly what we're working with. So, examples of some dark fantasy stories, to kind of give a basis for what exactly it looks like, the forms it can take, and just to give some recommendations, actually, which is the secret second purpose behind me bringing these up. If you're looking for any dark fantasies to consume, or you're curious about the genre, you want something to, like, kind of dip your toes into and just see how it feels. These are some good examples of dark fantasies that you can use as touchstones, reference points, or entryways. Maybe not entryways, but at the very least, like, touchstones. As I'm looking at this list, I am once again hit with the realization that, like, not everyone has seen, read, or been exposed to everything. I do my best to get, like, a pretty wide net of different stuff, but yeah, so, like, if you are unfamiliar with any of the things I talk about, I will not be going into any spoilers. I will be talking a bit about these series and, like, giving, I will talk a bit about them, but I will be avoiding any, like, important story details, because these are all very good, and I want you to go see them, and I wouldn't want to ruin that for you. So, without further ado, starting with books, because of course we're starting with books. This is actually, one of these I was surprised to see on the list. I looked at a couple, I think exactly 2, might have been 3 lists of just dark fantasy stories. I was surprised actually to see both of these. The first one, because I never heard anyone talk about it, but I'm also chronically offline, so I don't know what people are not talking about. And the other one, because I wouldn't necessarily have called it a dark fantasy, but looking back, it's very much a dark fantasy. It's just, like, Brandon Sanderson at the time. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's not a horror writer, despite the fact that horrifying things happen in his stories quite a lot. So, like, I never looked at, we'll start with this first one. Mistborn, the first era of Mistborn, the first 3 books, the Final Empire, the Well of Ascension, the Hero of Ages. It's a phenomenal trilogy, by the way. I do believe it's the most popular one. I'm not actually sure about that one. I think it's the most popular or the most widespread one of his. It's great. I love all 3 of these books. The first one is one of my favorite things as well. It's great. And yeah, like, Mistborn really does fall pretty nicely into the dark fantasy category and even the vibe, while also, in certain ways, not. So Mistborn takes place in probably the most dark fantasy world of all of the other things I am going to mention, which is surprising, because one of the things I am going to talk about in a bit is Berserk. But at least Berserk has normal sunlight. So yeah, like, the world that Mistborn takes place in is, this really alien world where there's ash falling from the sky constantly, the sun is red, it feels bad to live in this place. And, there's also a lot of scary things living out in this world and stuff that you're contending with. Like, I'm not gonna, once again, I don't want to talk too much about any of the stuff in the book. It's very, very good. It's kind of lighter on the end of dark fantasy things, because despite the fact that, like, it very squarely hits a lot of dark fantasy, like, checks, the story itself, I do not believe is that heavy. And not necessarily saying that, like, that heaviness is a necessary aspect of dark fantasy. Like, I feel like it's very easy, especially with the first book, to read it and not be struck by too much quote-unquote darkness. It's a very hopeful book. And I think that that is a good thing, because, like, that whole thing of, like, hope is something that I think dark fantasy does very, very well. So, like, yeah, it's very good dark fantasy. If you're looking for something that's, like, horrifying in its dark fantasiness, then you can get that from Era 1 of Mistborn, very much. You, like, 100% you will get that from Mistborn, but, you know, it's not grimdark. It's just not grimdark, and if you're looking for stuff that's more grimdark, this is not the place where you're going to get that. And I think that's fine, and I hope that you do as well. The other book that I have on this list of examples of dark fantasies is, and I'm going to say this right now, I've only read the first book of this, so I cannot speak as to the quality of the rest of the, I believe it's a trilogy, or maybe it's like a series of 6 books, which is 2 trilogies that are set together. I don't actually know. It is The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. Brent Weeks quickly stole my heart as one of my favorite authors of all time after I read his Lightbringer series, which there is an argument that could be made that Lightbringer is a dark fantasy. I would not say that. I would say it's a quote dark unquote fantasy, as in a fantasy with dark elements, but I would not call it a dark fantasy. However, The Way of Shadows absolutely 100% is. It's really dark. The Way of Shadows, it is textbook dark fantasy, removing kind of in The Way of Shadows, removing all of the kind of more fantastical monsters and demons and all of that, and replacing them with just people. It is a very human-focused piece. So, like, all of the dark fantasiness comes from people, and that's kind of where you get the most, like, for lack of a better term, uncomfortable drama that you get in a lot of dark fantasy. But yeah, Way of Shadows is a lot. Way of Shadows is a lot, and, you know, if you are very much a dark fantasy person who's looking for a lot, then, like, yeah, you'll absolutely get that from this book. I loved it. I loved it a lot. There was, like, one point where I was like, this is kind of cheesy, but, like, it was cheesy in, like, the best way. I really love Brent and how he does his stuff, and, like, even reading it in this first book that he released, I just really, really enjoy the way that he does his stories. But I'm kind of getting off track here. But yeah, those are the 2 books, which are kind of on complete opposite ends of the dark fantasy spectrum, where Mistborn is a lighter, more palatable, but still dark fantasy title, whereas Way of Shadows removes all the monsters and demons and things and says, hey, people suck, and they can suck a lot, but they're still good there. And that point is actually going to be very important for the instructional portion of this episode. But yeah, 2 very good books that I highly recommend. Very good examples of dark fantasy writing. For my anime and manga people, you heard me talking about Berserk. Berserk is dark fantasy to a capital T, and that T is written with red ink to look as scary as possible. Berserk is the pinnacle of everything that I like and a lot of the things I don't like about dark fantasy, but it's also just really, really good. Berserk is a manga. For those of you who do not know what manga is, that is the Japanese word for comic book. So Berserk is a fantasy manga, follows the main character whose name is Guts, and, like, yeah, his name is Guts. Like, it is dark fantasy to a T. there is brutality, there is blood, there is death, there is fear, there is fighting against monsters, both man-made and of a dark divine nature. Berserk is like the epitome of everything dark fantasy. It has the best art of anything, I think, that I've ever read. That might be... There have definitely been, like, contenders. There have been things that, like, I have looked at and been, oh my gosh, these illustrations are so great. But Berserk just has such a specific type of appeal and strength in its art and its direction. And it's just really, really cool. And then, you combine that with a super well-written story, and you get one of the most special, most influential dark fantasy titles ever made. But yeah, Berserk typically needs no introduction, but I spent the time introducing it anyway. So that's my manga recommendation and kind of example. My anime, for y'all anime onlys, and a lot of you have probably seen this one, Madoka Magica, which is not probably what you would have expected me to say talking about dark fantasy, because it is set in the real world. Madoka Magica follows, I want to say she's in high school, she might be in middle school, middle schooler whose name is Madoka, grappling with some new realities and choices that have been placed before her as she is learning truths about her world that she was unprepared for. It has been so long since I've watched this show, but it remains one of my favorite things ever, and a really, like, foundational story for me and my development as a writer and as a person to a degree. Like, it was one of my first anime, and it really stuck with me. It sticks with me to this day. Like, it is still one of my favorite things. It's a 12-episode show. I highly recommend it if you're curious at all about dark fantasy. I think it's also a very good example of dark urban fantasy. Urban fantasy meaning set in the real world with fantastical elements. I think it's very, very good. Rounding out this list with some good old Western TV shows, we have Castlevania, which was Netflix's... I believe it did very well when it came out. I do not remember, because I was in high school at the time and didn't really care, but I did hear people talking about Castlevania, so I'm assuming that me saying Castlevania will stir some memories, ring a few bells, turn some heads, because Castlevania is, like Berserk, the epitome of dark fantasy. It's got it all. It's got vampires. It's got gothic levels of storytelling. It's got monster hunters. It's got a guy who drinks and swears a lot. It's dark fantasy, once again to a T, but instead of being written in red ink like Berserk, it is written with beautiful calligraphy by candlelight. Not saying that one of them is better than the other, although I love Castlevania with all of my heart. Castlevania, like Berserk, maintains the through line that I think is the strength of dark fantasy, which I will reveal by the end of the episode. It's very good. Castlevania is also a lot. Castlevania, for those of you who don't know, Dracula's wife dies, and he decides to make it everyone's problem. It delves into a lot of things. It talks about religion. It talks about humanity and suffering, all of that stuff. It's a lot. Incredibly well produced. One of the most surprising things I had ever seen come out of Netflix at that time, when Netflix was just dropping straight bangers. I'd never thought about Castlevania before the show came out, and now it's one of my favorite things of all time. Yeah, Castlevania is great. It's also a lot. But yeah, those are the examples of dark fantasies to kind of give us a starting point for what it is after we talked about kind of how it works. And that's kind of the complete explanation and kind of chatting about dark fantasy as a concept, with some examples, some recommendations, and all that stuff. So, let's dive in a little bit to that, like, very cool central through line of dark fantasy that I like a lot. So, if you were to ask me what I believe the central aspect of a dark fantasy is, I would say something along the lines of people striving. With all of the examples that I have given, and every example of dark fantasy that I can think of, the kind of central idea, whether, it pans out well for them or not, is people pushing back against an encroaching darkness of some kind. You see that in all sorts of, quote, heroic media, like, in your Lord of the Rings, in your, in your Aragons. I don't know why I'm thinking Aragon. I'm trying to think of fantasies when Aragon came up, and also in your superheroes and stuff. And dark fantasy takes the heroic and makes it not more realistic, but perhaps more relatable, more viscerally connective to our everyday experience. Going through everyday life, doing stuff, striving against the stuff in your own life, you do not feel, probably, like a hero or like you are winning. You feel like you are climbing up a hill, pushing a rock that is always going to slide back down. You feel like Sisyphus. Dark fantasy captures that feeling and plays it on repeat throughout the entire story. It puts its characters in a situation where everything sucks quite a lot, and they are doing their best against that. I think that that is a very beautiful thing that dark fantasy does. And obviously, this is not me saying oh, every dark fantasy story is about this. But I do think, by nature of becoming a dark fantasy story, you end up working with a lot of that. You end up having characters going through a journey where they are fighting this uphill battle with the rock on top of them, just by virtue of, that's kind of how it feels to do a dark fantasy story. And for people who like dark fantasy, I feel like there is some sort of catharsis there in seeing people going through a simulation of that struggle, feeling that weight, and then seeing a character, fighting back against it. There's a catharsis in looking at that character and being able to relate to not only that feeling of struggle, but seeing them struggling well. Something that I really like about that is it gives us the ability to be very human in the stories we tell, despite the insanity that's happening on the screen. It's very easy, I feel, to get too lost in a good story to the point where you kind of disassociate from your real life. But I think dark fantasy has a quality where it kind of doesn't let you do that, because dark fantasy isn't trying to, it's not soothing you. Dark fantasy typically is very brusque, is very hard on you as the person going through it, or as the consumer or reader or watcher or whatever. In one of the examples that I used with The Way of Shadows, I mentioned how it just kind of hits you right in the face from the beginning and saying, this is the kind of story that we're telling. You can't really get away from that in dark fantasy. And I think that that's a very cool quality, because it means that no matter how outlandish the situations that you start crafting within that story, there's a level of humanity, a level of groundedness that is going on, which is very special, I think, because it gives you the opportunity to really pour into your audience very directly. So what is my favorite aspect of dark fantasy? Why do I like dark fantasy so much that I am talking about it for way longer than I have talked about anything in a while? It's about freedom from the creative side. I was talking to a coworker of mine a little bit ago. She really likes horror movies. So I was very curious, and I asked her, what do you like about horror movies? And something that she said actually really stuck with me. She was like, you just never know what's going to happen. The idea that there aren't formulas that they are bound to, because this is horror. So they can do whatever they want. If they want to make someone explode, they can make someone explode. If they don't want to do that, they can do that. But there's no strictures anymore, because horror means you're already trying to disturb your viewer in some way. So there's no limits to what you can do, good or bad. And that's inherently exciting. So I mentioned freedom. I mentioned this idea of you never know what's going to happen. What does that have to do with dark fantasy? Dark fantasy is probably the most versatile genre ever, because you can kind of just do whatever you want and still be within the bounds of your category. Fantasy is the most versatile genre. Stop. It is, fantasy. You can do whatever you want. You want to world build something completely alien to the experience of life in the real world? Do that. No one can stop you. It's fantasy. You want something to be set in the real world? Congratulations. Urban Fantasy's got you. Just put dragons in New York and call it a day. Like, fantasy you can do anything with. But there's always a limit to how far you can go with certain ideas and situations in fantasy because, you're not doing horror. And you don't want to go too far because, one reason or another. But with dark fantasy, you get all the versatility of fantasy with the lack of restrictions of horror. Like, yeah, you get to blend the best of both worlds, and what you come out of it with is, truthfully, a blank check to do whatever the heck you want, good, bad, neutral, and no one can stop you. And I think that that's really cool, and as a creative, I really enjoy receiving blank checks to do whatever I want to do. So dark fantasy really appeals to me in that way. But there's also... there's two parts. It's that freedom that you get, and then also the emotional contrast that is almost only possible in dark fiction. And not dark fiction. That term is so unhelpful. We're going to keep saying dark fantasy. But this, I believe, goes for any sort of genre or any sort of story that has horror as an aspect of it, but not all of it. You can contrast emotions so well and so deeply in stories that have darkness. And it's always super, super special to see that happen. I mentioned The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks. This is something that he does very, very well in general. I think it is one of his strengths as a writer. And in Way of Shadows, which is the first book he published, it was like on full raw uncut display. This, idea of like how he uses darkness to magnify the effect of moments of light. It's super, super cool. And like, it's something that you only get in stuff where darkness is real, where like darkness is a tangible threat, which it can only ever be so much of in normal fantasy. Not even just heroic fantasy, just like non-dark fantasy. Like, Legends and Lattes isn't going to hit as hard emotionally because, I doubt any of them is going to grapple with the fact that they have to murder someone. Also, I haven't read Legends and Lattes, so I might be completely wrong. But you aren't grappling with the whole of humanity in most non-dark types of stories. So there's always space for the cynical person to be like, oh, well, what if they were in a worse situation or blah, 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 blah. I am a very firm believer that the world is a complicated mess that is not hopeless. And I think that the best way to showcase that can only really be done through dark fiction. And dark fantasy really gives you a lot of great tools to showcase that. The through line that I was mentioning earlier that goes through Madoka and Berserk and Castlevania also. And also in Way of Shadows and in Mistborn. Like, with all of these things that I've mentioned, which are like leaning towards the darker side of things, there's this through line of light, this through line of hope that you are kind of holding on to the entire ride through. And that, I think, is a unique strength of dark fantasy and genres like it, to put you in a position where you are grappling with the dark realities of the world, but you're also reminded of the light realities of the world. And because of the darkness, that light shines ever brighter, and it pierces through to your soul in a way that I have never experienced in something that was not willing to rip my heart out of my chest. But yeah, that's what I like about dark fantasy. That is the thing that I love about it, and why I try to take elements from it when I am writing myself. But yeah, so let's move on to our final section: how to tell stories in dark fantasy. So, I talked a lot about hope, darkness, light, juxtaposition, giving light and all that stuff, and harmonizing and blah, 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 blah. But what do I actually mean by all of that? Like, what am I practically saying? So, first off, I'm not saying to make it a happy ending at the end of a dark story, because that would kind of defeat the purpose, wouldn't it? I hate over-categorization. It is my least favorite thing, and a genuine fear of mine as a writer is that I will over-categorize myself to the point where like I lose the ability to do things because I've stopped thinking about them as possible. Happy endings are great, but endless happy endings become meaningless. When you're writing in dark fantasy, when you're engaging with these dark themes and doing all that stuff, you are not obligated to force an outcome just because it feels good. And in fact, you are writing in a genre which welcomes you to have it be sad, to have it be tragic. Tragedy is not inferior or less good than happier forms of stories, and we shouldn't look at it as such. Now, I do think that tragedy needs to be handled with care and not done recklessly or flippantly, because, once again, when you engage in storytelling, you are taking people's hearts into your hands. So if you are intending to harm those hearts, you need to be conscious of what you're doing when you're doing that, because you put ideas out into the world and people consume them. What was the book? When I was very young, when I was in, I think, 8th grade, I listened to the audiobook for Fairest, which was book 3.5 of the Lunar Chronicles, and it messed me up. It was sad. It hurt my heart, and to this day, I feel the effects of that story on me, and like the tragedy of that story on me. Like, it really did shape and affect my worldview because of where I was at the time and all of that stuff. And like, I'm a little afraid to go back and go through that book again, cause pain, remembered pain. Like, it was a painful experience. So am I saying that it's bad because it was a painful experience? Not at all. It was a phenomenal book. Very well written, very well put together. I loved it, but it hurt. And it was sad, and I didn't like that it was sad, but it was sad on purpose, and it accomplished the goals of showing how someone can become a monster with, that was like the entire point of the book, was like showing how someone can become a monster. And it was sad, and it sucked, but it was not a bad thing to be exposed to. Maybe at that age, but I've always been a little bit of a, I don't really know how to say this. I was about to say an advanced reader, and I guess that's the best way to say it. I was always a bit of an advanced reader. I was always ahead. So I did, in this situation, kind of run face first into a wall I was unprepared for, but that wall also broadened my ability to understand people and things that previously I would not have been able to. Like, I am not even joking when I say, like, reading Fairest gave me the ability to empathize with my enemies. Or, like, it helped me empathize with my enemies. Because, like, there's a world, there's a reality where different situations and different choices I make could have me being like them. And like, that's the power of stories, man. That's what they do. So if you are writing in dark fantasy, and you are writing in dark fantasy with the intention of creating a tragedy, don't just make it sad. Put something beyond that sorrow. Put something there for people to take away from it. If all you're doing is writing a sad ending to be a sad ending, then I implore you to, like, kind of look deeper into that sad ending. What makes it sad? Like, what causes the tragedy? And let that be the message. Let that be the thing that people take away from this ending. Just because I think hope is important doesn't mean that you have to have a good ending. It just means that you have to have a bad ending with a purpose. And for the people of you who are doing happy endings or happier endings or whatever, or who don't want to go the tragic route, you don't have to. Congratulations. You can do whatever you want. But yeah, I think dark fantasy really shines when you are doing stuff like that, actually. I think, like, and I talked a bit about this before, but like, light shines the brightest when it's dark. Happy endings are the best when they're overcoming insurmountable odds. And oh boy, do you not get more insurmountable than living in a dark fantasy world. Like, thinking about the high moments from some of, like, the best dark fantasies. Thinking about stuff like, you know, Trevor Belmont in Castlevania overcoming himself to defend people again. Or the main character of Mistborn also overcoming herself to protect people that she doesn't think are capable of caring about her, despite how much she cares about them. Or the main character in Way of Shadows, learning the importance of love, despite the awful world in which he lives. It's it is always so fascinating to, like, investigate my reactions to stuff like that, and never are those reactions stronger than when it takes place juxtaposed against a grueling struggle to reach those endings. So when writing dark fantasy, if you are intending to do a more upbeat, maybe not upbeat, but like a more hopeful ending, or just maintain a core of hope through to the end, don't lie. Don't manufacture false hope and let that be the thing. If you are choosing to write in dark fantasy, you are choosing to write in a genre which is unafraid of grappling with the dark realities of our world and the world in which the characters live. So also don't be afraid of that. Don't shy away from things in order to maintain hope. Hope is tough. Hope has to be tough. Hope can take a couple hits. If hope can't take hits, it's not hope. It's false. So when, maintaining your core of hope through your dark stories, put that hope in something that is durable, because false hope will shatter, and it should. So make sure that your hope isn't false. And this is a tip for both kind of things. And once again, there's, this isn't a binary. There's not, oh, you're doing a happy ending or you're doing a sad ending. Endings exist on a spectrum. I'm waving my hands and doing like jazz fingers because I think this word has been so overused, but it's a good word. Like, it's not a line. It's not just a band. Like, it's a whole spectrum. You can be up, down, left, right, center. It's all over the place. So like, there's no just happy, no just sad. But this goes for all of you who are engaging with dark fantasy. Whether you are doing a tragic ending or a non-tragic ending or whatever, whenever you engage with the concept of dark fantasy, understand that you are playing in an area, in an arena, where people are very willing to say you are the most realistic of the genres. There is a lot of pessimism out in the world today, and that pessimism means that people are way more willing to believe that the world sucks and is all bad and has nothing going for it. And as people writing in dark fantasy, you will be engaging directly with that idea. Don't feed in to the notion that the world is only sucky, because it's not. And, this is something that you are, once again, free to argue with me about, but you're incorrect. The world is multifaceted and complex, and regardless of the direction at which you look at it, you will never see the same thing twice. Yes, the world sucks, but also, yes, the world can be quite wonderful. I'm kind of starting to lose my voice a bit, so we're going to start wrapping up. But I do want to hammer in the point that It is not black, it is not white, it is gray. It is gray, and within that gray, you find the entire spectrum of all the colors in various concentrations in various places, and it is important for us as the people who truly do shepherd people's hearts and minds to be the bastion which reminds people that even if what you're seeing right now is the bad side of things, the bad side of things is not everything. So whenever you're engaging, whether you're, doing tragedy, not doing tragedy, and all that stuff, be aware that you will be supporting or combating this notion. And, your belief should be your belief. So don't take my word at face value, but I am still correct. I've never been wrong in my life. You can fact check me on that and you'll find out it's true. The world has a lot. So don't narrow the view down in order to push people's faces into the dirt. We should be the ones who are helping lift people up, because without us, who is going to do it? Yeah, that's about as much of this, I think, as my throat can take right now. I was very, very surprised when I kind of felt it going out when I started recording. I was not prepared for that, which is a little annoying, but, you work with what you have. So, thank you all so much, once again, for listening. It means a lot that people listen. And it excites me to see where this will go in the future. Let me know what you thought about today's episode. I'm very excited for this format. Kind of getting back into more structured type episodes. So this is going to be very fun for me, if people like it. But if you don't like it, well, I will continue refining it and all that. But, please let me know what you think in the comments, in the reviews, all that stuff. If this is your first episode, welcome. This is about how it goes. So yeah, if you liked it, go ahead and follow the show. I would love to have you. It's a learning process, and I am excited for those of you who want to learn and continue with me. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.